with waterfowl, okay? These are represented by ducks, geese, and swans. That's what we consider to be waterfowl. So we go through them. We'll go through them in the next picture. So what do we know about waterfowl? They are those herbivores. They're eating primarily plant material, but some insects and invertebrates as well in the water system. They swim. They have webbed feet. They swim and fly. They dive also. And so they're grouped into these, the ducks themselves are grouped into dabblers and divers. So if you hear someone talk about a dabbling duck, it's the kind of duck like a mallard that sits on the surface of the water and just tips down to feed, so their butt's sticking up. Versus the diving ducks, which are mergansers, goldeneye, those kinds of things, which actually are diving after fish and stuff on the bottom. Okay? Anyone know what this duck is? This is the species we see here, especially in the spring. I'll tell you, it's a northern shoveler. And I know, and I heard Sally saying mallard, and that's what, see the green head, you think mallard? Mm-hmm. So here they are together.
Oh, you can tell the difference.
So here's what you're looking, so here's part of the lesson about ornithology is how do you look at birds? What do you look at? Because it can be completely overwhelming. What do you focus on? Especially if you're only going to get a small or a short glimpse of something. So you focus on things that strike you, color, but where is the color? Because those colors are repeated across lots of different birds. Shape of the bill, if you can see it, color of the eye, just whatever can strike you. So the difference between a mallard and a shoveler, yes, they both have that iridescent green head, but that's kind of where it stops. Different bill color. The rust on the side of the shoveler is really diagnostic, but the shoveler has this humongous flat beak that other ducks don't have. They're similar size, sure. So this is just to help you train yourself to, when you're looking at something and you want to know what it is, maybe you don't, you're just looking at it to admire its beauty, and that's great too. But if you're kind of curious about what it is, you have to always be thinking, if I can only remember one thing about this bird, what's it going to be? Because this has happened to me 100 times. I think, okay, I've got this, 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 and this. And I start flipping through the bird book, and you never find what it looks like, right? Because I just didn't remember something key about it.
So would both of those ducks be in the same pond or river or whatever?
Great question, and yes. And the example is I have a wetland near my house, and shovelers, there's one pair of shovelers that comes through every spring. Hi, Diane. And there are mallards on that wetland as well. But yeah, they can certainly be there. Okay, different group of birds. It's not waterfowl, it's water birds. And these are not your ducks, geese, and swans. These are things like herons and egrets, bitterns, those kinds of things, okay? I don't know why they're called water birds, because they're tied in water, but you've got to distinguish them from waterfowl. And typically, what's grouped into water birds are things that are not single breeding pairs. They're grouped, they're colonies of birds. But before we move on, can we work on what? We know two of these birds. The lower left, actually that's another trick question. Because you would think it's a Western grebe, but it's really a Clark's grebe, which looks exactly like a Western grebe, other than some subtle thing with its head. The lower right you all know though, right? Sandhill crane. I don't know what that gull is, sorry. Gulls are my nemesis, I'll let you know right now. Gulls and sparrows, don't even ask me about them. So water birds are typically referred to as colonial water birds. They nest in colonies. Gulls, herons, cormorants, grebes. And those nests can be on the water, they can be in trees, they can be on the bare sand of islands. It's just the common denominator is there are large groups of them. And they're tied, even if they are nesting on land, they're tied to water of some sort. It might be the ocean, might be a marsh, could be a reservoir, a lake of some sort. But they're usually linked to water, which tends to make water birds. Great blue heron, everybody knows that one, right? I kind of forget that we're supposed to be doing this. So this is just a little fun fact, since we're talking about water birds. Your bird guide, most bird guides that we're familiar with, has a certain order to it, right? You get familiar with what part of where do I flip through if I'm looking for the warblers or the woodpeckers or something like that. They're typically in taxonomic order, which means that as birds have been figured out where they fit into the evolutionary chain of things, that's sort of what their position in the book. So the book starts with the oldest known birds, the most primitive birds, and those are grebes and loons. So pretty much any bird guide that you pick up, not necessarily, this might, no, this still does it too, but I'm talking about like your National Geo guide or your Audubon guide or your Golden guide or something like that. When you flip through that, the very first page you're going to come to are grebes and loons, because they are the most ancient of our birds. And what's unique about grebes and loons is that their feet are very far back on their body. So they can't walk on land well at all because they're front heavy. So they try to walk and they just kind of fall and forth. It's really noticeable in a loon because they're so big, massive bird. So that's why water is critical to them. They build a nest, a floating nest platform that they create out of emergent vegetation that they just rip up and keep piling until they have a nest structure. That's floating. It's not floating in deep water, but it is floating in the emergent vegetation, and they have to be able to swim to that nest because they're not like a mallard duck that will get out and walk all through our pastures and that kind of stuff. They can't do that. They have to be able to swim. And it's why these two species especially are very vulnerable to where they select to nest, because if that body of water is controlled by a dam and the water level drops quickly or rises quickly, rising's not as much of a problem because the nest should float, but if the water level, because of the management, just all of a sudden starts dropping and they're still nesting and they can't swim to their nest, they're just going to abandon because they can't get there. So it's a concern. It used to be a concern when we worked on loons back in the Northeast because a lot of the lakes had dams there, but most of them were managed for hydropower, so it was fairly predictable and consistent. Out here where water bodies are managed for irrigation, it's a little less predictable sometimes, and it has been my worry on Cascade Reservoir that we might just suddenly get look, it's a dry year, we need tons of water, and the water just starts going out really fast. They seem to be fairly smart about when they decide to start nesting, and maybe they have figured something out, but certainly they don't understand what's going on in the human mind, and so yeah, there are certain times when there could be just total failure. Okay, another group of birds, shorebirds. Lots of different kinds of shorebirds, and these guys are hard to identify because they often occur in very large flocks, especially during migrations when we see a lot of our shorebirds because they're moving through to nest in the Arctic areas or much farther north on the tundra. And so they come through in big flocks and they land in our mud flats on the coast, they're inland, and yeah, there's just mixed flocks and hundreds of birds, so they're hard to identify. But these are the birds that we typically associate with mud flats and estuaries and more around saltwater than freshwater, although there certainly are that are associated with freshwater. So it includes things like sandpipers, phalaropes, whimbrels, all that kind of stuff. These are exotic names. If you haven't lived on the coast, you're probably less tuned into shorebirds than like in McCall. Although we do have a few really common ones around McCall, which hopefully we'll have a picture of. This guy comes through in the migration. Anybody know? This is an avocet. Really beautiful bird. Places I've seen this is again on Cascade Reservoir early in the spring when the water level's low, the mud flats are still exposed. Again in the fall when the water level's low. So these shorebirds in particular are the probers and the mud dabbers, they're called, and they usually have long bills, curvy They can curve up, they can curve down, they can be straight, they can be thick, they can be thin, you know, short, long, more of them are long than short. So there come in all varieties. Long legs, short legs, little, small, lots of shorebirds. This is a shorebird, but this is a bird you know. If you heard it, you would know it. It's the bird that's known for pretending it's got a broken wing to lead you away from its nest on the ground.
I keep saying the wrong one, like killdeer.
It is a killdeer. It is a killdeer, yes, okay. The double black stripe on its neck. Yeah, so this is sort of an example of a shorebird that doesn't really have to be tied to the shore, because we can see them out in pasture lands, right? They're oftentimes near where they water the cattle though, but yeah. And yeah, they're noisy, and they're the ones that if you start walking too close, they're gonna flutter and land, or they're gonna do the whole broken wing, come get me. And that's a distraction display, is to follow me, I'm hurt, I'm easy prey, because my nest is over here and I don't want you to get my nest. And when they lead you far enough away, then they'll just fly. Yeah. Okay, now we're getting into the, I shouldn't be this way, subjective, but for me, the more interesting. So the raptors, hawks, eagles, owls, also called birds of prey. Okay, raptors, birds of prey. These guys are at the top of the food chain because they are making their living either eating other birds, smaller birds usually, or killing snakes, voles, mice, that kind of thing. But they are killing their own prey in almost all instances, except turkey vulture is lumped in with the raptors just because they probably didn't know where else to put them. But they're one example of something that doesn't kill their own prey. And so they have tools, obviously, anatomically, that allow them to do their job very efficiently. So they've got big feet, sharp talons, big feet relative to the rest of their body, and usually, even if their beak isn't big, it's manufactured to dispatch something very efficiently, another songbird or a little mouse or something. So even the kestrel, which is only this big, has a very sharp curved beak with a notch in it that can, you know, do some damage. So we've got diurnal birds and nocturnal birds in this group as well, this group of raptors. One of the first groups of birds I ever worked on when I worked in New Hampshire, Iowa, and I always loved this Gary Larson part too. Because it's kind of true, like every discipline, those people who study birds get attitudes about them, and the raptor people definitely think they're cooler than the other guys. Yeah, for sure. So we have both primary and secondary consumers or carnivores. What's different about raptors than, say, shorebirds or waterfowl is that they lay just a few eggs, and they invest a lot of time into raising those chicks. So that those are kind of the two strategies, not only with birds, but with pretty much all critters in the wild. You've got K and R, right? If you remember biology class, K selection and R selection. You know, you can either put your energy into laying a lot of eggs and hope that one or two of them survive through adulthood, or you can put all your energy into just a couple of eggs, but invest a lot of time and stay with them and make sure they make it to survive. And so the raptors are that latter category. They're going to lay a few eggs. They're going to have really long incubation times, really long nestling periods, and stay with them until they have fledged. And even then stay with them after they fledge and continue to feed them and continue to make sure that they are going to have a good chance of survival. So this group of birds was also the group of birds that silent springing was all about in the whole DDT era. It was actually peregrines that warned us about DDT initially. Then it was found in other birds, but it was the thinning of eggshells. And so DDT was not killing birds directly. It was interfering in their ability to reproduce over time. So raptors are very long-lived birds, you know, eagles can live 20 years in the wild. But you have to replace yourself at least once during that time, or the population as a whole is going to go down. And that's what DDT was doing. It was interfering with calcium development in the birds, so when they laid eggs, they had very thin eggshells, and when the birds tried to incubate them, they smushed them, broke them. And so you had failure after failure after failure, years and years and years of failure, and that's what eventually caused peregrine populations to go down the tubes. But this is not a peregrine. Or is this bird? Red-tailed hawk, thank you. Notice the red tail. But a young red-tailed hawk doesn't have a red tail. So that's when you just kind of go, we're in Idaho, it's July or September. I'm going to say red-tailed hawk, because 9 times out of 10 you're going to be right. Okay? Who's bigger? Great gray owls, which are on your left, or great horned owls. Both have the word great in them, which tells us they're big birds, right? And if you've seen either one of them, they're big birds. But who's bigger?
Great, great.
And why do you say that?
Because they're just huge.
Well, so are great horns. Yeah, okay. Anyone want to take the alternate guess?
Well, is it just because his feathers are all puffed up? I
Oh,
mean, what do you mean by bigger? Way
That's
more?
exactly the question. That's the question. That's it. How are you defining bigger? So yes, great grays are longer or higher in stature, but great horned owls have greater mass. They weigh more. They're heavier. And they're pretty similar in size. So it just depends on how you define it. Anyone seen a great gray around here? Pretty much everybody? Yeah. Yeah. We're concerned about great gray owls around here. If anyone has listened to Leon Powers talk or read his books, he used to come up here in the 80s, and he was a professor at Northwest Nazarene College, and did great gray owl work up here, put up nest boxes, surveyed all of Long Valley multiple times with his students. And then came up more recently, and you know, it's just so depressing for him to go around, and places that they used to see great grays are now either housing development or something else has changed about it. So yeah, I mean, we still have great grays around here, but clearly not the numbers that we had 30 years ago. So compare the great gray owl, talking about size, to Idaho's smallest owl, which is the flame-related owl. So even though the relationship in height is one value, what is it? 1/4. The flame-related owl only weighs like what an apple might weigh. Tiny bird. Even an apple is probably heavier than the flame-related owl.
And so do you see those very often?
I have surveyed flame-related owls. That's the case study we're going to talk about later on. I mean, I've done surveys for years. I've never seen one.
Oh,
I mean, I've heard of them, I detect them, but I just don't see them. Yeah, only a few people have seen it. I mean, they're nocturnal and they're tiny and they live in cavities. And a couple of people have said, yeah, I saw one sticking its head out of a cavity. Like, wow, that's so cool. Yeah, no, I mean, I've got all sorts of data on flame-related owls, but truly have never seen one in the wild, just opportunistic. Okay, another group of birds, upland game birds or upland birds. We sort of call them upland game birds. These are things you might go out and shoot for dinner. So it's turkeys, quail, pheasants, those kinds of birds. It even includes the one on the right, which is mourning dove. So turkey, California quail, mourning dove, and another sage-grouse. So this is the opposite example of the raptors. These are the other extreme, because these are the ones that, could lay 12, 13, 14 eggs in their nest and just hope that one of them makes it. Their young are called precocial young, because as soon as they hatch, the young are out of the nest and running around with the parent. And, you would never have that. It takes an eagle chick 2 months before it'll let her leave the nest. So this is the other strategy. life history strategy is to be quick, numbers game, and be quick about it.